This is another illustration of the leader Ayyangali. We find that the turban is still here in this illustration also, and this appears to be the bust of the leader. If you take a closer look, you'll find that instead of the body, the artist has made use of a fully grown paddy field. That is, it's not the body that is depicted, but it is the paddy field. And the artist cleverly juxtaposes this image of the paddy field along with the head of Ayyangali to invoke the kind of strong hold that he had on the agrarian economy during his time. And this would be understood better only if we take a look at the next illustration, which is this one. Now in this also you have a paddy field, you have Ayyangali and his followers standing, but all of them are outside and the paddy field is uncultivated. Now this is actually something that took place in 1913 and ended only in 1914, which was the first ever agricultural strike in Kerala, and it was for a very just cause. Now let's look at the history behind the strike. Dalit communities like Pulayars were the people who cultivated the fields and filled the granaries of the landlords with paddy. Life under the landlords didn't offer them scope for improvement, but the colonial administration offered chances of bettering their situation through education. When Ayyangali demanded that Dalit children be admitted to schools, it irked the upper caste landlords and even invoked harsh criticism from several so-called progressive thinkers of the time like Swadeshabhimani Ramakrishna Pilla. He is supposed to have said, putting those who have been cultivating their intelligence for generations together with those who have been cultivating the field for even more generations is like putting a horse and buffalo together under the same yoke. Unquote. It shows his derisive derision for the kind of labor power that is there, or for labor that is there. So reacting to the stiff opposition, Ayyangali said, if you don't admit our children to schools, we'll let weeds grow in all your fields. Further, on his instigation began the year-long agricultural strike in 1930. Granaries did empty, and though Dalits starved, they looked out for other openings like fishing to feed themselves rather than go back to agricultural fields. Ayyangali was the first person to use Dalit labor power as a powerful political weapon. And as Sanal Mohan, another eminent Dalit studies scholar, observes, Ayyangali was successful in creating an assertive consciousness by using labor power in such a forceful manner. Once this strike ended with the intervention of the colonial administrators, the demands of the leader as well as his followers were met. The children were admitted to schools, but of course it was not at all an easy path for them. It was not roses all the way. There was stiff opposition still from certain quarters, but it definitely was a remarkable achievement from their previous history. Now let's take a look at other illustrations. Now in this, until now, the three illustrations that we have taken a look at, we have looked at the assertions of Ayyangali as well as that of the male body. Now the next two illustrations that we are going to look at is about the assertion of the female body, and which is this one. Now this is a legendary woman by name Nangeli who has been depicted in this illustration, and this is something that took place during pre-colonial period in Kerala. And at that time there existed a tax called as the breast tax or the mulakkaram, and the custom was that women of the lower caste were not allowed to cover the upper parts of their bodies. And if they wished to do so, they had to pay this tax, which was an exorbitant amount, to the tax collector. So the woman who is depicted here, Nangeli, wanted to cover the upper part of her body, And on knowing her intentions, the tax collector visits her house. The custom was that they had to place a lighted lamp, and beside the lighted lamp, they had to place a plantain leaf, a banana leaf, on which that amount would be placed. So she completed all the rituals. She lighted the lamp, she placed the plantain leaf, and on the pretext of getting the money, she went inside, and instead of bringing back the money, she severed her right breast and placed it on the plantain leaf. And so that's what you'll find on this illustration. There is her Nangeli whose right breast has been cut off. She has placed the right breast on the plantain leaf. There is the horrified tax collector there, and on top of his head there is fire, which is that of the lighted lamp which was there. And Nangeli also has the sickle in her hand. We will be looking at the image of the sickle in illustrations later on. And there is also something else which I'd like to bring your attention to, and that is that of the ears which have been drawn just beneath the tax collector. Now, this is something that took place only later on, but was also symbolic of the violence that was inflicted upon Dalit women during that time and even later on. That is, women of the time, to indicate their caste, had to wear a earring, an iron earring, which was called as the kunukku. And with modernity, when women refuse to wear the kunukku, it is said that upper caste men cut off the ears of the women. And that is why you find the women that the ears have been depicted in this image. Plus, next to around the Nangeli, around the woman, you find a necklace that has been drawn here, and which was the kind of necklace which was worn by women of the Dalit communities, again as a caste marker. Now we'll look at that, more about that in the next illustration. In this illustration, this is something that took place in 1915 on the 10th of December. It took place at a place called Valya Maidanam in Kollam, which is in the southern part of Kerala. And what happened was that, as I've already mentioned, women of the time were not allowed to cover the upper parts of their bodies. They had to wear a stone necklace which was called as the Kallumala. They had also to wear the Kunukku. So by this time, several riots had taken place on the instigation of Ayyangali and so many other reformers, so that both men as well as women could have a dignified appearance. They wanted to cover the whole of their bodies. They wanted to cover the upper parts of their bodies. They wanted to wear clothes which would go down to their ankles. And several writings had taken place. Several Dalit settlements were burnt down. Several upper castes, they had retaliated, and several upper caste houses were also burnt down. There were several injuries and wounds and deaths on both sides. And after all that, in 1915, on the 10th of December, Ayyangali, along with certain other upper caste leaders, addressed a gathering of around 4,000 women. And in this gathering, the upper caste representatives openly admitted that from now onwards, no harm would be done to women if they wish to cover the upper parts of their bodies, or if they wish to cast off their caste markers like that of the stone necklace or the iron earrings. And immediately after their speech, Ayyangali made a call to the women, stating that each and every woman should come onto the stage, onto the dais, to and cast off their stone necklaces and wear a rauka. A rauka is something like that of a blouse. And that is what is actually depicted here. That is, you find that the women below are all queuing up for their turn. In the center, there is a woman who is actually half naked and who is waiting for her chance to go. And on the stage next to Ayyangali, there is a woman with a sickle in her hand. She has cast off her stone necklace and she has worn the blouse. And this is the kind of transformation that, the assertive transformation that women could do by on this particular day. Of course, this was not a process which began just out of the blue. It was something that was taking place for several years together. And another thing that you would find is that in both in this image as well as the previous image, you have the woman holding the sickle. This is the previous image where the woman Nangeli holds the sickle, and in the next image also you find the woman holding her sickle. Now, the sickle traditionally is an agricultural implement, a tool which is used for harvesting in the paddy fields. And but in both these illustrations, we find that the sickle is not used as an agricultural tool. It's not an agricultural implement, but it is used more as a weapon to assert the dignity of women. And Raghavan Athole carefully has chosen the sickle to depict this assertion. Now, in all these illustrations that we have looked at, what we find is that Raghavan Athole has visualized the subaltern history of Kerala in a very affirmative manner. He doesn't look at the subservience that was inflicted upon the communities, but instead he looks only at the assertions that these people who were a part of the Dalit movement in Kerala actually did. Now, visuals are important. These kinds of visuals are important because it helps to inscribe upon the memory of people. And that is what these illustrations have also done. Thank you very much.